Step away from the vehicle right now. The command cracked across the parking lot so sharply that several people stopped walking and turned their heads. The black Mercedes sat beneath the afternoon sun outside a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., its polished surface reflecting streaks of gold light from the glass towers surrounding it. Nathaniel Brooks froze with one hand resting on the open driver's door. For a brief second, the city seemed to hold its breath. The distant hum of traffic faded beneath the growing tension. A young police officer was already moving toward him, one hand raised, his expression rigid with certainty. Officer Ryan Mitchell had been on duty since dawn. 12 hours of reports, complaints, and routine patrols had left him exhausted, but the dispatch call that had come through minutes earlier had sharpened his attention instantly. A luxury vehicle matching the description of a suspicious report had been flagged near the courthouse district. Now his eyes were fixed on the man standing beside the Mercedes. Nathaniel slowly turned toward the officer. He was dressed simply in a charcoal gray jacket, dark slacks, and polished brown shoes. No expensive watch flashed on his wrist. No entourage surrounded him. Nothing about him matched the image many people expected when they imagined the owner of a vehicle worth more than most American homes. His calm eyes settled on the officer. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked quietly. Ryan ignored the question. "Step away from the car and keep your hands where I can see them." Several pedestrians slowed down. A woman carrying a coffee cup stopped near a crosswalk. Two interns wearing courthouse badges exchanged uncertain glances. Phones began appearing in hands. Nathaniel complied without hesitation. He closed the car door gently and stepped back. There was no anger in his face, no challenge in his posture, only patience. Yet something about that patience unsettled Ryan more than resistance would have. The officer approached the vehicle, studying the license plate, then looking back at Nathaniel. "Is this your car?" he asked. Nathaniel nodded once. "Yes, sir." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. The answer seemed too simple, too calm. The Mercedes gleamed beneath the sunlight, its flawless paint reflecting the courthouse columns only a few hundred feet away. A warm breeze carried the scent of summer pavement through the lot. Somewhere nearby, a flag snapped softly against its pole. Still, the tension remained. Nathaniel glanced toward the courthouse entrance. In less than 24 hours, one of the most significant judicial hearings in the country would begin inside those walls. Lawyers had flown in from California, Texas, Florida, and New York. News networks were already preparing coverage. Yet at this moment, none of that mattered. To everyone watching, he was simply a black man being questioned beside an expensive car. Ryan placed a hand on his radio. "I'm going to verify a few things," he said. Nathaniel offered a polite nod. "Of course." The officer stared at him for another moment, searching for nervousness, irritation, anything that might confirm the conclusion he had already formed in his mind. But Nathaniel Brooks stood quietly beneath the afternoon sun, composed as stone, while the courthouse windows reflected the fading light behind him, and a growing crowd gathered to watch what they believed would be an ordinary encounter that was about to become anything but ordinary. Nathaniel reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a slim leather wallet. The movement was careful, deliberate, as though he had performed it thousands of times before. He opened it and held out his driver's license without a trace of irritation. Officer Ryan Mitchell accepted it, but did not immediately look down. Instead, he continued studying the man standing in front of him. Something about Nathaniel's calm demeanor felt unusual. Most people became defensive when questioned. Some grew angry. Others tried too hard to appear cooperative. Nathaniel did neither. He simply waited. The afternoon sun drifted lower above the courthouse district, casting long shadows across the concrete. Reflections shimmered across the Mercedes, creating flashes of silver light that danced across nearby windows. The small crowd continued to grow. A pair of courthouse clerks stood near the entrance pretending not to watch. A rideshare driver paused beside the curb. Even a security guard near the building had begun paying attention. Ryan finally lowered his eyes to the license. Nathaniel Brooks. The name meant nothing to him. At least not yet. The address was listed in Georgetown. The photograph matched perfectly. Everything appeared legitimate. Yet the officer's instincts continued pushing him toward suspicion. He glanced at the vehicle again. The car looked expensive even by Washington standards. Few people drove one like it. Fewer still parked directly outside a federal courthouse. Ryan pressed his radio button. Dispatch, I need verification on a registration. Static crackled softly before a voice answered. Nathaniel listened quietly. The breeze stirred the leaves of several maple trees lining the street. Across the road, the American flag above a government building moved gently against the bright blue sky. The scene would have felt peaceful if not for the tension hanging over the parking lot. While Ryan waited for a response, Nathaniel's gaze drifted toward the courthouse steps. He checked the time on a simple silver watch. Not because he was worried about the encounter, because his schedule remained packed. Meetings, briefings, preparations. Tomorrow's hearing would draw national attention. Reporters would analyze every word. Legal scholars would debate every decision. Yet none of that importance showed in the way he carried himself. To the people watching, he looked like an ordinary man caught in an uncomfortable misunderstanding. A young woman standing near the crowd quietly whispered to her friend, "Do you think he really stole it?" Her friend shrugged. "I do not know. Maybe." Nathaniel heard the exchange, but gave no reaction. Years of experience had taught him that assumptions often arrived before facts. Sometimes they arrived long before facts. Ryan's radio finally came alive. The dispatcher requested additional information. The officer frowned and repeated the plate number. Then he stepped several feet away to continue the conversation. Nathaniel remained beside the vehicle, hands relaxed at his sides. A distant church bell rang somewhere across the city. The sound echoed faintly between buildings before fading away. 1 minute passed, then another. Ryan's expression gradually changed. The confidence that had filled his face earlier seemed less certain now. He listened carefully to every word coming through the radio. Then he asked the dispatcher to repeat the information a second time. Nearby, a courthouse employee noticed the shift immediately. "Something changed," he murmured. Ryan lowered the radio slowly. His eyes lifted toward Nathaniel again. This time there was less certainty in his stare and far more confusion. Whatever he had expected to hear from dispatch was not what had come back. Nathaniel noticed the hesitation immediately. Years spent listening to testimony, weighing evidence, and reading people had sharpened his ability to recognize uncertainty. Officer Ryan Mitchell no longer looked like a man convinced he had solved a problem. He looked like a man trying to understand one. The radio remained in his hand, but his grip had loosened. Around them, the mood of the crowd shifted as well. Curiosity replaced certainty. The assumptions that had arrived so quickly only minutes earlier now seemed less secure. Ryan turned away from the gathering spectators and spoke quietly into the radio once more. "Can you confirm that information?" he asked. The response came back immediately. The dispatcher sounded confident. Very confident. Ryan listened without interrupting. Then he rubbed the back of his neck and glanced toward the courthouse entrance again. His heartbeat felt slightly faster than before. The afternoon heat suddenly seemed heavier beneath his uniform. Across the parking lot, Nathaniel stood exactly where he had been asked to stand. Patient, respectful, unmoved. His calmness only deepened Ryan's confusion. Most people questioned by police demanded answers by now. Some became frustrated after only a few minutes. Nathaniel had not asked a single question since providing identification. He simply waited. A black SUV rolled slowly past the courthouse gates before disappearing into traffic. Somewhere nearby, a siren echoed briefly and then faded into the distance. Washington continued moving around them while this small moment remained frozen in place. Ryan lowered the radio and walked back toward Nathaniel. "Mr. Brooks," he began carefully, "what brings you to the courthouse today?" Nathaniel's expression remained neutral. "Work." The answer sounded simple. Yet something about it felt deliberate. Ryan glanced toward the massive stone building rising above them. Hundreds of attorneys, clerks, officials, and visitors passed through its doors every day. "Are you an attorney?" Ryan asked. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "No, officer." The crowd leaned closer. The young woman holding a coffee cup had not moved in nearly 10 minutes. 2 courthouse employees stood quietly near the steps. Even the security guard continued watching from his post. Ryan folded his arms. "Do you work for the federal government?" Nathaniel considered the question for a moment. You could say that. The answer was technically true, yet it only increased the officer's frustration. He wanted certainty, facts, explanations. Instead, he kept receiving calm responses that revealed almost nothing. A warm gust of wind swept through the parking lot. Leaves skittered across the pavement. Sunlight flashed against the courthouse windows. Ryan looked down at the identification card in his hand again. Nathaniel Brooks. The name continued bothering him. Somewhere deep in his memory, it felt familiar. Not familiar enough to place, but familiar enough to create doubt. Then another voice suddenly called out from the courthouse steps. Justice Brooks. Several heads turned instantly. A man in a dark navy suit was hurrying toward the parking lot carrying a leather briefcase. He appeared concerned, almost out of breath. Justice Brooks, there you are, he said. We have been trying to reach you. Silence spread through the crowd like a wave. Ryan's eyes widened slightly. The suited man stopped beside Nathaniel and looked between the two men. His expression changed immediately as he sensed the tension. Is there a problem here? He asked. Ryan felt something cold settle in his stomach. His gaze shifted slowly from the suited man back to Nathaniel. The title echoed inside his mind. Justice. Not counselor. Not attorney. Justice. For the first time since the encounter began, Ryan realized there was a very real possibility that he had misunderstood far more than a vehicle registration. For a moment, nobody spoke. The sounds of the city seemed distant now, muted beneath the weight of a single word. Justice. Officer Ryan Mitchell felt his throat tighten. The suited man standing beside Nathaniel adjusted his briefcase and looked at him with polite confusion. I am Daniel Mercer, he said. I serve as Justice Brooks's judicial clerk. The statement landed heavily. Several people in the crowd exchanged startled looks. One courthouse employee actually lowered his phone and stared. Ryan's eyes shifted back to Nathaniel. The calm expression, the measured voice, the complete absence of panic. Suddenly it all made sense. Dispatch had not sounded uncertain because there was a problem with the vehicle. They had sounded uncertain because they were trying to understand why a Supreme Court justice was being questioned in a courthouse parking lot. Ryan felt heat rise beneath his collar. Justice Brooks, he repeated quietly. Nathaniel offered a small nod. Yes, officer. There was no triumph in his voice. No sarcasm. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Somehow that made the moment feel even heavier. Ryan glanced at the identification still in his hand. The information from dispatch replayed inside his mind. Registered owner confirmed. Federal security credentials verified. Supreme Court Justice Nathaniel Brooks. Every detail had been there. Every fact. Yet he had spent the last 15 minutes trusting assumptions instead. Daniel Mercer looked between them again. Is everything resolved? He asked carefully. Ryan opened his mouth, but struggled to find the right words. Around them, the atmosphere had changed completely. The spectators who had quietly accepted the officer's suspicions minutes earlier now looked uncomfortable. The woman with the coffee cup lowered her gaze. One of the interns shifted awkwardly. Nobody seemed eager to speak. Nathaniel noticed the silence. He had seen it many times before. The silence that arrives when certainty collapses. The silence people wear when they realize they may have judged too quickly. A cloud drifted across the afternoon sun, softening the bright light that had covered the courthouse plaza. The glass windows reflected pale silver now instead of gold. Ryan finally handed back the identification. Justice Brooks, he stopped. The sentence refused to come together. Nathaniel accepted the wallet calmly. Thank you, officer. The response was gracious, but it did not ease Ryan's growing discomfort. In fact, it deepened it, because Nathaniel was giving him respect at a moment when many others would not have. Daniel checked his watch. We should go, he said quietly. The briefing starts in 20 minutes. Nathaniel nodded. Tomorrow's hearing was too important to miss preparation for. Reporters across the country were already discussing it. Legal analysts were filling television panels with predictions. The case would examine questions of public trust, accountability, and fairness inside institutions that affected millions of Americans. Ryan's stomach sank further as the irony settled over him. The man standing before him was not simply an important official. He was preparing to help lead a national conversation about justice itself. Nathaniel turned toward the courthouse steps. Then he paused. Slowly, he looked back at Ryan. The officer braced himself for criticism, for disappointment, perhaps even anger. Instead, Nathaniel's voice remained calm. Officer Mitchell, he said, facts deserve the same respect we give first impressions. Sometimes more. The words were gentle, yet they landed with more force than any lecture could have. Ryan stood motionless as Nathaniel and Daniel began walking toward the courthouse entrance. The crowd parted quietly to make room. No one said a word. They simply watched as the two men crossed the plaza beneath the towering columns of the courthouse. And as Ryan remained beside the Mercedes, holding his radio in one hand and staring at the ground, he could not escape the feeling that the encounter was not truly over. In many ways, it was only beginning. Officer Ryan Mitchell remained in the parking lot long after the crowd had dispersed. The courthouse plaza that had felt so crowded only minutes earlier now seemed strangely empty. A maintenance worker pushed a cart across the sidewalk. A city bus rolled past the intersection. Life moved forward, but Ryan could not shake the weight settling deeper into his chest. Nathaniel Brooks's final words replayed again and again inside his mind. Facts deserve the same respect we give first impressions. Sometimes more. The sentence was simple, calm, respectful, yet it followed him through the rest of his shift like an echo. By early evening, dark clouds had gathered above Washington. The golden sunlight had disappeared behind a blanket of gray. Ryan sat alone inside his patrol vehicle, parked near the Lincoln Memorial, staring through the windshield as light rain dotted the glass. He should have been focused on reports. Instead, he found himself thinking about the encounter, thinking about how quickly he had formed conclusions, thinking about how easily those conclusions had felt correct at the time. His radio crackled with routine calls, but his attention drifted elsewhere. Meanwhile, several miles away, Nathaniel sat inside a conference room on the top floor of a federal building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Legal briefs covered the polished oak table. Attorneys, advisors, and clerks reviewed documents connected to the hearing scheduled for the following morning. The room carried the quiet intensity of preparation. Every detail mattered. Every word would matter. Daniel Mercer organized a stack of folders before finally looking toward Nathaniel. "Justice Brooks," he said carefully, "may I ask you something?" Nathaniel nodded. "Of course." Daniel hesitated. "Why did you not file a complaint?" The room grew quiet. Several attorneys glanced up from their notes. Nathaniel folded his reading glasses and placed them gently on the table. "Because the purpose of justice is not humiliation," he replied. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The city lights below had begun to glow through the evening mist. Daniel shifted in his chair. But what happened today was unfair. Nathaniel offered a faint smile. "Many things are unfair." He looked toward the rain-covered skyline. "The question is what we choose to do after recognizing it." The attorneys returned to their documents, but the conversation lingered in the room. Hours later, Ryan finally arrived home. His apartment was small but comfortable. A framed police academy graduation photograph sat on a bookshelf beside family pictures. He loosened his tie and switched on the television. Instantly, a news broadcast appeared on the screen. A photograph of Nathaniel Brooks filled the display. Beneath it ran a headline discussing the nationally anticipated hearing scheduled for the next morning. Ryan froze. The reporter spoke confidently about Justice Brooks's reputation for fairness, integrity, and careful judgment. Interviews followed. Former colleagues praised his character. Legal experts discussed his influence on American law. Ryan sat down slowly. The room felt unusually quiet. He stared at the television as a realization settled over him. The man he had questioned that afternoon possessed every reason to use power, status, and authority against him. Yet he had chosen restraint instead. Outside, rain continued falling against the windows. Inside, Ryan lowered his gaze toward the floor. For the first time since becoming a police officer, he was forced to confront a difficult possibility. The biggest mistake he made that day was not failing to recognize a Supreme Court justice. It was failing to recognize the humanity of an ordinary man before he knew who that man was. The next morning arrived beneath a sky washed clean by overnight rain. Washington looked different after a storm. The sidewalks glistened. The air felt cooler. Sunlight reflected from glass towers and government buildings like sheets of polished silver. Nathaniel Brooks stood alone near a large window overlooking the city before the hearing began. In the distance, the Potomac River shimmered beneath the early light. The quiet moment reminded him of something his father used to say when he was a boy growing up in Baltimore. Character is revealed most clearly when nobody is watching. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Yesterday's encounter had never truly been about a car, a parking lot, or even a mistaken assumption. It had been about something larger, something older, the challenge of seeing people clearly before assigning meaning to them. Across town, Officer Ryan Mitchell sat inside his patrol vehicle parked near a public square. He held a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the parking lot, the crowd, the certainty he had felt, the certainty that now embarrassed him. He had replayed every detail dozens of times. What troubled him most was not the mistake itself. It was how natural the mistake had felt in the moment. A notification appeared on his mobile phone. The hearing was being broadcast live by multiple news networks. Ryan hesitated before opening the stream. Then he tapped the screen. Instantly, the courtroom appeared. Elegant wood paneling, American flags, rows of attorneys and observers. At the center sat Nathaniel Brooks, composed and focused. There was no sign that the previous day had affected him at all. Ryan watched silently. Hundreds of miles of legal arguments, years of policy debates, and countless lives would be influenced by decisions made in that room. Yet the man leading the hearing carried himself with the same calm dignity he had shown in a parking lot. The contrast stayed with Ryan. Inside the courtroom, attorneys presented arguments concerning public trust, accountability, and fairness. Nathaniel listened carefully to every speaker. He interrupted no one unnecessarily. He treated every participant with the same respect regardless of status or position. The hearing proceeded with remarkable professionalism. Watching from his vehicle, Ryan felt a growing sense of discomfort mixed with admiration. Then something unexpected happened. During a brief recess, a reporter interviewed several legal experts outside the courthouse. One professor described Nathaniel's reputation in a way that immediately caught Ryan's attention. Justice Brooks believes that every person deserves to be heard before being judged, the professor said. That principle has guided his entire career. Ryan stared at the screen. Every person deserves to be heard before being judged. The words landed heavily. Yesterday, Nathaniel himself had not been given that opportunity. Yet he had responded with grace rather than resentment. Ryan lowered his phone and looked through the windshield. Pedestrians crossed the street beneath bright morning sunlight. A father held his daughter's hand while waiting for a traffic signal. A construction worker laughed with a coworker. Ordinary people moved through ordinary lives. For the first time, Ryan realized that fairness was not something reserved for courtrooms, judges, or legal opinions. It began in small moments. Everyday moments. Moments when nobody expected them to matter. And as the city continued waking around him, Ryan quietly accepted a difficult truth. The lesson Nathaniel Brooks had given him was far more valuable than any punishment could ever be. 3 days after the hearing concluded, Officer Ryan Mitchell received an unexpected message from his supervisor. The email contained only a few lines and a meeting invitation scheduled for the following afternoon at a federal community outreach event near Capitol Hill. Ryan assumed it was routine. The department frequently participated in public programs. He arrived the next day wearing a pressed uniform and carrying a notebook. The event was held inside a restored historic building filled with civic leaders, educators, attorneys, and local residents. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating polished hardwood floors and rows of neatly arranged chairs. Ryan took a seat near the back of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed. Then the moderator stepped onto the stage and introduced the keynote speaker. Ryan felt his stomach tighten instantly. Nathaniel Brooks walked calmly to the podium. The room rose in applause. Ryan remained frozen for half a second before standing with everyone else. He had not expected this. Nathaniel began speaking about public trust, about responsibility, about the importance of listening before reaching conclusions. His voice was steady and thoughtful. Every sentence carried the quiet confidence of a man who had spent decades weighing facts carefully. Ryan listened intently. Then something happened that he never could have predicted. During the question and answer session, a local college student stood and asked a difficult question. "Justice Brooks," she said, "have you ever personally experienced being judged unfairly?" The room grew quiet. Ryan's pulse quickened. He immediately thought of the courthouse parking lot. Several people leaned forward in their seats. Nathaniel paused for a moment. A faint smile appeared on his face. "Yes," he answered. "More than once." The audience nodded sympathetically. The student continued. "What did you do about it?" Ryan lowered his eyes toward the floor. He already feared the answer. He expected criticism. He expected a story about injustice. Instead, Nathaniel looked across the room and spoke gently. "I learned that most people are more than their worst assumptions. Silence settled over the audience. Ryan slowly lifted his gaze. Nathaniel continued. Sometimes a person makes a mistake because they stop seeing an individual and start seeing a conclusion. The answer is not always punishment. Sometimes the answer is growth. Ryan felt the words strike deeper than anything he had heard before. Then came the moment that changed everything. Nathaniel's eyes briefly moved across the audience and landed on Ryan. Only for a second. Yet Ryan knew he had been recognized. The justice remembered him. There was no anger in his expression. No resentment. Only calm understanding. The realization left Ryan speechless. In that instant, he finally understood the full truth. Nathaniel had known exactly who he was from the beginning. He had recognized him at the hearing. He had recognized him in the audience. And despite every opportunity to embarrass him publicly, he had chosen not to. The room erupted into applause as Nathaniel finished answering the student's question. Around Ryan, people smiled and nodded in appreciation. But Ryan barely heard them. Because the greatest twist was not that the man he questioned had been a Supreme Court justice. The greatest twist was that the man he misjudged possessed a level of grace and character far greater than the authority attached to his title. The event ended with conversations scattered throughout the hall. Small groups gathered near the windows. Business cards exchanged hands. Community leaders spoke with students. The energy in the room remained warm and hopeful. Yet Ryan Mitchell stayed in his seat long after most people had stood up. He watched as Nathaniel Brooks greeted attendees one by one. There was no sign of impatience. No indication that he considered anyone beneath his attention. Whether speaking to a university professor or a high school volunteer, he offered the same focus and respect. Ryan felt a growing responsibility settle over him. For days he had carried regret. Now he realized regret alone was not enough. He finally stood and made his way through the crowd. Each step felt heavier than the last. Several times he considered turning around. But he kept walking. Nathaniel was speaking with an elderly veteran when Ryan approached. The veteran thanked him and moved on. For the first time since the courthouse parking lot, the two men stood face to face without an audience watching closely. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows behind them, filling the room with a soft golden glow. Ryan cleared his throat. Justice Brooks. Nathaniel turned and offered a polite smile. Officer Mitchell. The fact that he remembered his name made Ryan feel even more uncomfortable. He took a slow breath. I owe you an apology. Nathaniel remained silent, allowing him to continue. What happened that day should not have happened. I made assumptions before I had facts. I treated you like a conclusion instead of a person. Ryan looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. I am sorry. The words felt simple, but they were honest. Nathaniel studied him for a moment. Around them, conversations continued quietly. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from a refreshment table near the far wall. Somewhere outside, church bells rang faintly across the city. Finally, Nathaniel nodded. Thank you for saying that. Ryan blinked. He had expected more. A lecture. A criticism. Perhaps even a reminder of his mistake. Instead, Nathaniel's response carried no bitterness. I have spent my career around people, Nathaniel said. People make mistakes. The important question is whether they learn from them. Ryan listened carefully. I am trying to. Nathaniel smiled slightly. I believe you are. The simplicity of the exchange surprised him. No humiliation. No punishment. Just accountability paired with grace. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Nathaniel reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small card. He handed it to Ryan. It listed information about a community initiative that brought judges, police officers, educators, and students together for conversations about trust and fairness. Come to the next meeting, Nathaniel said. Not because you have to, because you want to understand. Ryan accepted the card. The thick paper felt unexpectedly significant in his hand. I will, he replied. Nathaniel nodded once. Good. As people continued leaving the hall, Ryan realized something profound. The justice had not merely accepted an apology. He had offered an opportunity. And sometimes the most powerful form of forgiveness was not forgetting a mistake. It was believing someone could become better because of it. 1 year later, spring sunlight spilled across the National Civic Center in Washington, D.C. Cherry blossoms swayed gently in the breeze, scattering pale pink petals across the walkways like pieces of drifting paper. Inside the conference hall, hundreds of attendees filled the seats for the annual Community Trust Forum. Police officers sat beside teachers. Judges sat beside students. City leaders exchanged ideas with neighborhood volunteers. The atmosphere felt hopeful, built on conversation rather than division. Near the front of the room stood Officer Ryan Mitchell. His uniform was crisp, but there was something different about him now. The certainty that once rushed ahead of facts had been replaced by patience. Over the past year, he had attended every community meeting Nathaniel Brooks recommended. He had listened more than he spoke. He had learned names, stories, and perspectives he once might have overlooked. Most importantly, he had learned to slow down before reaching conclusions. Across the hall, Nathaniel arrived quietly. There were no cameras following him, no announcement of his entrance. Yet people greeted him warmly. Students approached him with questions. Community organizers thanked him for his support. He answered each person with the same kindness and attention. Ryan watched from a distance for a moment before walking over. Their eyes met, and both men smiled. No tension remained between them, only mutual respect. "Good to see you again, officer," Nathaniel said. "Good to see you too, Justice Brooks," Ryan replied. The words came naturally now. During the opening session, speakers shared stories about trust, understanding, and responsibility. One young student described how a mentor had changed her life simply by believing in her potential. An educator spoke about the importance of listening before judging. As Ryan listened, he realized how often the same lesson appeared in different forms. Every meaningful change seemed to begin with seeing another human being clearly. Later that afternoon, the forum concluded. People slowly filtered toward the exits. Conversations lingered in the hallways. Outside, sunlight reflected off nearby buildings while a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming trees through the city. Nathaniel stepped onto the front steps and paused for a moment. Ryan followed a few minutes later. Together, they looked across the plaza where people from different backgrounds walked side by side. Neither man spoke immediately. There was no need. Some lessons did not require more words. A group of students crossed the street laughing together. A bus pulled away from the curb. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echoed softly through the afternoon air. Ryan finally glanced toward Nathaniel. "Thank you," he said quietly. Nathaniel looked at him. "For what?" Ryan smiled. "For giving me the chance to become better instead of making me pay for being worse." Nathaniel's expression softened. He nodded once. Then both men stood silently for a moment, watching the city move around them. The sunlight warmed the stone steps beneath their feet. The breeze carried another wave of cherry blossom petals across the plaza. And as those petals drifted through the golden afternoon light, neither authority nor status seemed important anymore. What remained was something stronger. A lesson learned, a mistake transformed, and the quiet dignity of two people walking away with greater understanding than they had when they first met.